Distinguished delegates, this afternoon, as announced at the end of our meeting this morning, the committee will take up first Agenda Item 3, entitled Improving the Procedures for Communication of Information, as well as the quality and formats of reports to be submitted to the Conference of the Parties. Outcomes of the work of the Committee on Science and Technology on Monitoring Framework for the Strategic Objective on Drought. Subsequently, the committee will begin its consideration of Agenda Item 5, Development and Promotion of Activities for Targeted Capacity Building to further the implementation of the Convention. Distinguished delegates, I invite the committee to begin its consideration of Agenda Item 3, entitled Improving the Procedures for Communication of Information, as well as the quality and formats of reports to be submitted to the Conference of the Parties, outcomes of the work of the Committee on Science and Technology on Monitoring Framework for a Strategic Objective on Drought. I now give the floor to the representative of the UNCCD Secretariat, Mr. Baron Orr, to introduce the note by the Secretariat entitled Outcomes of the Work of the Committee on Science and Technology on Monitoring Framework for the Strategic Objectives on Drought, as contained in document ICCD/COP14/CST7 and ICCD/CRIC18/4. Mr. Orr, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. By its decision 15, COP13, paragraph 8, the Conference of the Parties is considering the need for a specific indicator for the strategic objective on drought, which is contained in UNCCD 2018 to 2030 strategic framework adopted by the parties at COP13. The Bureau of the CST, in collaboration with other members of the SPI and the Secretariat, formed a working group to review the options and possible indicators, all of which is outlined in this document. The Bureau of the CST, working with an SPI working group, concluded that there are a wide range of approaches to defining and then monitoring drought, and parties reported numerous different indicators in use at the national level at CRIC 17. All of these approaches and indicators are useful under specific circumstances. However, no individual approach or indicator covers all needs identified by parties. To account for this, the SPI working group developed a tiered approach for the establishment of an indicator and monitoring framework for Strategic Objective 3, which is outlined under the conclusions in this document. So with that, I'd like to walk you through exactly what's going on inside this document. So as was noted, the task was to explore the need for an indicator that would address essentially drought vulnerability. And the CST Bureau looked at that in two ways, both where we were in terms of data and technology and in the infrastructure that would be required to make this work. And they also looked at it in terms of need. And in terms of need, the answer was now is when we need this indicator. So they pursued a process where they explored this technically with experts on the SPI, and they tasked the Secretariat with understanding what has been done in the past within the UNCCD, both on the side of drought and in terms of the structure of our monitoring framework for all indicators, and then looking at what all other intergovernmental, UN, and other bodies are doing where it might influence the success of a global indicator so that those initiatives could be leveraged. So the approach here was to basically answer that question about the need for the indicator, conduct the comprehensive policy review, establish the criteria upon which the framework would be based, identify options for monitoring drought. I put back for your attention Strategic Objective 3 and the expected impacts to emphasize that even in the decision, we often call this the drought indicator. But in reality, it's important to recognize that we're talking about drought vulnerability. Of course, in this convention, we're linking what is happening biophysically with what the impact is on people and how vulnerable they are to that impact. In this case, we're talking about both communities and ecosystems, as is true with all of what we do in the convention. So when we looked at the mandate and the approach, there were a large, as you will see in the document, a large number of decisions. And you might be thinking, why were we so comprehensive when normally this text in these documents is relatively limited? Well, the CST Bureau, some of the members of which have been participating in the convention for a very long time, reminded the Secretariat that it took 20 years to go from idea to the land-based progress indicators, which were adopted in 2011. And they made it clear that this time it needed to take much less, hopefully only 2 years. So if we have that in mind, they really wanted to be sure that all the past problems that this convention ran into when developing indicators were looked at, and the solutions that were identified, the lessons learned, would be incorporated into the framework so that we would not have those same problems a second time. That's why it's so detailed. The second reason is the CST Bureau made it very clear that this is not a convention that's set up to create something new. We're not going to be in the business of creating a brand new indicator, and when we started this, there was nothing moving forward that we were aware of that could qualify as a global indicator for drought if you consider all the puzzle pieces that are necessary to make that work. That will become more obvious as I go through this. So the CST Bureau said we need to know what everyone else is doing, essentially, so that we can leverage it. And so that is another part of this. And then, of course, we also looked at the indicators that you listed in the CREEK 17 reporting cycle, where we had an idea of what countries are actually doing. So this is the summary of what I just described, that process that we went through. And when we look at the framework side of this, I want to remind you that there were a number of steps that were taken by this CST, which overcame serious challenges to actually establishing an indicator framework for land degradation. And those were in this decision so that we can actually model, if you so choose, the approach to monitoring drought conceptually and structurally in an identical way to the way we approach the other indicators. One of the key aspects of this is something that's actually innovative for this convention. We actually identified a process I'm going to describe in a moment before the SDG process was launched. And it's a process that the SDGs pursue in an identical way. What is that? Well, first of all, this convention long ago recognized that being comprehensive with indicators is not possible when something varies so greatly from place to place, like land degradation, right? It's very, very different from place to place. And when the COP actually studied whether or not there were common indicators, the summary of all land degradation indicators used in all countries that were unique added up to 1,500 indicators. So we were never going to be in this convention in the position of pursuing a comprehensive monitoring approach. So what was innovative is that the convention went the other direction. Today that would be called an essential variables approach. At the time it was called a limited set of indicators. But what does it mean? It means that we're talking not about complex indices and many, many indicators to describe something, but instead actually using the word indicator by its true definition, identifying something that would be indicative of what we were concerned about at the national and global levels, not comprehensive. That's why there are 3 land-based progress indicators and not 128 like in the Biodiversity Convention, right? We chose a very, very different approach. So, and I would argue it's been successful. If you look at the monitoring success that we saw at Creek 17, 145 countries, and moving very far in the direction of harmonization and strengthening the value of those indicators. And as you also will know, we solved the challenge of national to global reporting. But you all also pointed out that the next task would be to understand the relationship between national and subnational, which is obviously a maturing system if we're going down that path. With drought, we're not at that stage. We're at the stage where we first need to identify the national to global approach. It doesn't mean that a country can't pursue detailed, comprehensive monitoring of drought at the local level. It just means that we need to go step by step, get the national to global solved, and then identify the relationship in the next round. So let me back up one. So, 1 second. So the other thing that is important for you to recognize that was innovative by this convention that was also used in the SDG process is 2 primary requirements which are actually opposing each other if you think about it. On one side, the UNCC demands harmonization and even standardization of the monitoring process in order to have comparability between countries. But a few sentences later in the same COP decision, it's required that the Secretariat support countries in their efforts to achieve national ownership of that entire process. In other words, so that you can use your national data. And if you use your national data and your national methods, you're now outside that harmonization process, or at least to some degree. But the Secretariat, and this is before my time, my predecessor and his team actually, it's partially they told me a little bit lucky, but they came up with a mechanism to bring these 2 worlds together. One that came about because of a fortunate meeting with Conservation International, which is the organization that created the tool that all of you use to support, well, you at least explored, you may not have used it in the end in reporting, but you at least used it for comparing national data to default data, which is called Trends.Earth. In other words, a platform was created that was straightforward, easy to use, that would allow that comparability so that you could choose the right data set for your national circumstances. And we requested what the SDGs request, which is called in their world good practice guidance, so that if you wanted to replicate what the underlying approach was with national data, you could do it. In fact, Conservation International took the algorithms and built them into the software so it could be automated. So that helped with this process of dealing with these dual tensions. So is there an equivalent possibility for drought? It's not an SDG, so we can't go and seek a custodian agency for drought because it doesn't really exist in the SDG process. And we are not the keepers of drought information. Generally, the ministries that are involved with this convention are not responsible for the national weather services and hydrological services. They tend to be a different side. So we are not in the position to automatically do this unless we leverage the one global initiative which is bringing all of that together. And that is WMO and a framework approach called the Global Multi-Hazard Alert System, which is maturing with respect to drought at about the same pace as you are requesting us to develop this framework. What does that mean? That means if we leverage that, we are essentially in partnership with all countries that are part of WMO, which is quite a few countries in the world, most of ours, if not all, and their meteorological and hydrological services. Well, why is that important? Because they're already calculating some of the data sets that I'm going to talk to you about in just a moment, and they're doing it nationally. So we're not forced to take a global data set and see whether or not it's relevant. You can start from day one using national data in that model. The power of this framework is that it's built on the issue of national alerts. Why is that important? It means it's sustainable, right? Disaster is a place where collaboration is solid across international boundaries because we need to work together to address disasters. So if they are taking on drought as a disaster and they're interested in helping us create a global indicator for drought, it's a powerful partner and it allows us to do this much. So with that in mind, we also looked at the indicators that you shared with us, and the key to this slide is the 408 at the bottom of the first column. It's a lot of indicators, and this wasn't even a study. This was just what you listed when you reported. I bet you there are more if we actually explored it in depth. So to make this work, this body adopted a process in generating the monitoring framework for land degradation, which was based on some fundamental criteria. We've already talked about some of them. We also have like comparability, global coverage, capacity to create national ownership. Sensitivity is the direct relationship between the indicator and the goal. So for example, your first indicator that you've adopted in this convention was poverty, right? The proportion of population below the poverty line. It's a wonderful indicator because it's exactly what we're concerned about. However, it's not sensitive to land degradation. It's very difficult to map poverty on top of a degradation map and say that there's a relationship between the two. It really is highly variable, but it doesn't mean it's not important, and that's why it is one of our indicators. Readiness is the same thing. When we did the study in 2010 on the indicators of importance to countries for land degradation, soil organic carbon was the #1 indicator on all 183 experts. It was unanimous. And yet, it was also unanimous for being the least ready. Would we drop an indicator so important to the convention simply because the science and the technology were not yet mature? No, we would work step by step towards it. And today, where we are with this indicator in terms of technology and data is far, far more advanced than we were in 2010. So it was a strong decision. Think about the synergies with climate change and with biodiversity conventions. Very powerful decision that was made by this COP. So with that in mind, I'm going to jump to the finish line, which is what did we, this team of people that were exploring this, propose in terms of a framework. Now this is risky to jump to the finish line because you don't have yet the basis for these 3 levels. So I'll illustrate it by talking about them one at a time to make this a little bit more compact. Level 1 indicator here is a simple drought hazard indicator. And if you look to the far right, you'll realize that this is actually what the WMO process I mentioned before has agreed to produce. Now be careful. I'm not saying the WMO is going to produce this. I'm saying all the countries in the world are going to produce this with guidance from WMO. It's right in line with our philosophies. So it's actually likely that you could report on this indicator in a few months after you requested, if you said this was something you wanted to do. It's ready to go. However, drought hazard is not drought vulnerability. There's not a human component here. It's not sensitive yet to the strategic objective. It takes part of the puzzle, but not the whole puzzle. The next level gets us closer to people. It's a simple overlay of that hazard map with population density, a very high resolution population density map. Now you can count the people who have been exposed to drought over a period of time. So if we consider these two levels, we're getting closer to vulnerability in terms of sensitivity. Both are relatively straightforward to produce, but we're still not where we want to be with vulnerability. So if we jump then to level 3, which is drought vulnerability, now we're in an interesting position. But if you look at one of the footnotes in the document, you'll realize that this is a young indicator. Only a few years ago, the best we could do globally for this involved literally 150, 175 variables. That is not something we would ever do in an essential variables approach. It's way, way too complex. But in recent years, actually 2 years ago, the Joint Research Council of the European Commission developed a drought vulnerability indicator that only has 16 variables and correlated very well with those earlier models, meaning we're getting better at this. And it's now more accessible, and it's something that could be shared. So if we take this together, we're talking about the possibility of creating default data for each of these levels in the same way that you requested default data for land degradation indicators, and then putting you in the position to make sure that that was comparable to national data so that you could make your own decisions about what to report. And then one more piece to this. Originally, when the working group produced this, they thought about these as stages, as that you would start at the first and then move to the second and then move to the third. But when the CST Bureau and the Creek Bureau met in June, it became very clear that that was not really what we have here. They observed that these are actually separate pieces of a larger puzzle. They're actually levels because there is a difference between them, and therefore giving the flexibility, because every country's circumstances are different, we should approach this where you could choose to report on one or some combination of these indicators. So you have flexibility in that regard, and you have flexibility in what you produce. Is it national data? Are you going to take the default data? That's a choice that you would make. And then there's one more piece here that's escaping me, but at any rate, this is the framework that we put forward for your consideration. And I think that may be the last slide. So the recommendations that we have here are actually almost verbatim, except for the first one perhaps, identical to the recommendation, the decision that was made when the land progress indicators were adopted. The only thing that's different is the drought words have been placed here. So if we start at the bottom, we're talking about over the next 2 years, the guidance on how to produce these indicators would be produced. The bullet point above that would be to work with WMO, who have already agreed if we, in other words, if you wanted to leverage that ongoing process I already described, they would be willing to work with us in a way similar to a custodian agency like an SDG, similar concept, which would put us in the position to do something right away. And then the rest is just the standard part of this, of creating the default data sets for your potential consideration once we get to the reporting process. And so I will finish by saying the CST Bureau is ambitious. They basically said, we don't want to put something forward that suggests there needs to be many more steps before we report. They strongly requested the SPI and the Secretariat to do this in a way that would put you in the position, if you so choose, to report in 2022, the next reporting cycle, so that we would have complementary drought and land degradation indicators. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Orr for his statement and presentation. Are there any delegations wishing to make a statement in connection with the report that was just introduced? I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the Secretariat, the CST Bureau, the SPI, the members of the working groups, and other partners for the huge work which has been done to develop an approach to establish an indicator and monitoring framework for Strategic Objective 3 on drought. We recognize that there is a wide variety of indicators currently in use in different countries. During last reporting cycle, the parties reported about more than 400 national indicators which are used under specific circumstances. Therefore, the global indicator and monitoring framework for Strategic Objective 3 is really needed. At the same time, it's very important to ensure that during the reporting process, the parties will be provided with necessary default data from global sources. Procedure like it was established in Decision 22 COP11 should be applied, and capacity of parties to verify and utilize the default data should be further strengthened. There are several other important things which should be also ensured, including synergy and cooperation with the WMO, the GRC, and other relevant specialized institutions and organizations, as well as coherence with existing drought management plans, programs, and initiatives at the national, sub-regional, and regional levels. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement. Now, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Dominican Republic. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman, for giving me the floor. I would like to thank you for the report. I believe that is the product of a significant effort. But at the same time, I would also like to point out that many of our countries have already made a great deal of progress in addressing drought. Drought is a recurrent phenomenon. It is a phenomenon that must be considered from all three dimensions: hydrological, socioeconomical, and land-based. And I believe that we have already made a great deal of progress, as I said, and many countries have national hydrological plans that have enough information about the overall water availability by hydrological regions and the pressure levels that exist in countries. For example, in the Dominican Republic, We have known about the level of pressure and drought and the per capita availability of water in each region, as well as the demand of water broken down by sector. So I believe that the parties can leverage the indicators that you have worked on in the working group. But I believe that we must also make efforts to organize interinstitutional efforts. For as you said, the institutions that are the focal points of decertification are not necessarily responsible for managing and addressing meteorological and hydrological data. But we can, in fact, we should strive for greater interinstitutional coordination. In fact, the Dominican Republic started to do just that this year. I would also like to underscore the importance of the LDN work of the working group, which pointed out all the critical processes in the various regions and the territories and the causes of drought. Because you see, water availability and the response that institutions can come up with so as to prevent it is an area of great interest to us. So once again, we welcome all the indicators, but if we want to address drought as an issue as of now, we must shoulder our current responsibility. And the information that this convention has on land degradation and on land neutrality give us a great deal of information that we could tie into and relate to drought. Thank you.
Thank the representative of Dominican Republic for her statement. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of India. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, India appreciates the excellent scientific work of the Committee of Science and Technology on a monitoring framework for the strategic objective on droughts and also the very efficient tasks given by the UNCCD. Mr. Chair, drought management in my country is carried out at 3 levels, that is at national level and state level and district level. The National Disaster Management Plan aiming to implement Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction has incorporated issues such as an understanding disaster risk, vulnerability, assessment, improvement of early warning system, drought monitoring, preparedness, mitigation, relief and response measure and capacity build for drought risk reduction with reference to drought. Mr. Chair, in India, we have very important scheme for such as Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. In short, it is known as MGNREGS, Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, Watershed Development Component, PMKSY-WDC and PMSKY per drop more crop. And very important scheme. This is related to it's very important relation to this convention, that is soil health card. This is an important type of card which contains all the details of nutrient, what type of things are required for that particular type of crop. Mr. Chair, the National Agriculture Assessment and Monitoring System provides near real-time information on prevalence, severity level and persistence of agricultural drought at state level, district level, even at the sub-district level. With respect to drought monitoring and early warning system, we want to say that a holistic approach for drought assessment by involving the indices related to soil moisture, meteorology, hydrology and agriculture is being adopted in many nations. Satellite remote sensing data enables continuous monitoring of agricultural lands based on biophysical indicators generated from sensor data. There is a national drought manual in India which provides the guidelines to state on drought monitoring and assessment. A strong weathering forecast system are the need of our to strengthen drought early warning system. Mr. Chair, in the drought system, there are very some important also like drought hazard, vulnerability and risk assessment, capacity building related to drought, monitoring and impact evaluation of drought proofing investment. There may be regional cooperation for establishment of monitoring mechanism, and very important type, hydrological drought and water body information system. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the representative of India for his statement. Are there any other delegations wishing to make a statement in connection with the report that was just introduced? Now, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Argentina. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, to begin, I would like to express my gratitude for the presentation and for the document itself. Because for Argentina, it is essential that we have adequate drought indicators. And that is important to use these indicators to develop early warning systems. That is important to assist us in defending the population from the effects of drought, which is one of the main problems mentioned within the convention that affects Argentina particularly. It is also important to protect our soil. And Argentina is a guarantor of global food production, producing food for approximately 400 million people, as I mentioned yesterday. But turning now to a more methodological matter, that is, the report itself and what is being proposed. I found it very interesting when you spoke about the tension that exists between the harmonization and standardization of data at a global level and the use of that data at the national level. And having participated myself at some meetings where the technical staff debates to what extent the data or the indicators that are developed globally can be applied at the national level, I think I can say that by addressing that inherent tension that you spoke about, we can find solutions. So when we're talking about whether a particular piece of data is applicable or is not applicable to a certain region or to a certain country, we can begin to elucidate answers or solutions. And to conclude, I would like to say that Argentina is very keen on developing national data that would allow us to scale up all the experiences that we have had with soil research, which is why it is very important for us to use all the relevant indicators produced at the international level and to use, for example, the SPI, the Science Policy Interface. We appreciate the indicators that you have presented, and we believe that they are encouraging because they can assist us in having early warning systems. Thank you, Chair.
I thank the representative of Argentina for his statement. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Indonesia has a very short comment on this, actually only indicating that Indonesia is a country known for its tropical rainforest and therefore very high rainfall. But it doesn't mean that the country is not also prone to drought. Some part of Indonesia suffer drought annually. Therefore, Indonesia is also very serious on this, and we're pleased to inform the committee that at this moment there are 3 institutions in our country working together to prepare the indicators, and they end up with they end up with a map of drought-prone region in Indonesia. So just to inform the committee that we are quite serious and advanced on that issue. Thank you very much, Chair.
I thank the representative of Indonesia for his statement. Now, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia. You have the floor.
Saudi. Thank you, Mr. Chair. At first, we would like to stress that Saudi Arabia, Arab countries, and most of the MENA countries are the most affected by drought in the world, and we have made strong efforts to put together indicators in line with international standards to study drought in our country. Well, we are availing ourselves of the experiences of each individual country, but what is important is to find all overall indicators and to study the reasons behind drought. We have also to study the effect of drought socially and economically. It is important to benefit from databases of international regional organizations such as WMO, FAO, and other organizations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the representative of Saudi Arabia for his statement. Now, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity to take part in this discussion. We do support what our colleague from Saudi Arabia and other honorable delegates said, that drought is one of the most tremendous challenges of the region, and that call for cooperation, because drought has an effect on food security and the economy. We know that indications have been put together, and we all know that finding these indicators is a challenge for the Secretariat, and that there is up to 1,500 indicators, but I think we should take into consideration the specificity of each state, to take into consideration the conditions of each country in putting together such indicators, because we know that each country has its specificity, so it needs its own special indicators. Well, we do support cooperation with WMO because we believe that this challenge needs to be addressed, and for that we have to deploy technology, and we need to build capacities so that we foster networking and foster cooperation in terms of finding indicators based on national data. So I think these national indicators should become regional and should become international. So we need also to heed precision. We need to standardize our efforts, and we need to pool our resources to provide assistance to the most affected countries. I think we need to put together a strategy on drought, because drought is as important a challenge as other challenges facing the international community. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Iraq for her statement. Now, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Of course, we align ourselves with what our colleagues from Saudi Arabia and Iraq have said, because the Arab countries are undergoing the dire effect of a drought. In Egypt, we are in the process of addressing the impact of drought, and we have integrated all our efforts in our strategy 2030. And I think that drought is a common factor among many regions because our region is water scarce, and the water scarcity is a direct reason for drought. The drought also has impact on the biodiversity and leads to the exacerbation of climate impact and climate change, which can directly affect our region. Thank you.
Thank the representative of Egypt for his statement. Now, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Syrian Arab Republic. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, in my turn, also align myself with what my colleagues from the Arab world have said, because drought is the most tremendous challenge facing the region. We in the Arab Republic of Syria suffer dearly from drought. More than 70% of Syria is directly affected by drought. In Syria, we have established a drought indicator in order within our LDN strategy. So our hope is to receive technical support in the field of capacity building in order to foster our measures, adaptation and mitigation measures. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Syrian Arab Republic for his statement. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The State of Palestine supports the statement of Saudi Arabia because drought has an economic and social impact on the entire region. Many of our countries are located in drought-prone areas. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the representative of the State of Palestine for his statement. I now invite Mr. Orr to respond to the statement made by our distinguished representatives. Mr. Orr, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will begin with the comment that came from the distinguished delegate from Ukraine, who focused on the, among other things, but a particular element, coherence of existing national drought plans. And I think that's extremely important. And I know that this body will be addressing the drought framework. There's another document that you'll be considering, and that within the Secretariat, there have been efforts to be highly synergistic between that effort, the effort of the SPI, which looks at land-based interventions. That's CST document 3 that was presented earlier today in the CST, and of course the indicators. So I think it's a very valid point that we should be looking at these in an interconnective way. The Dominican Republic raised an idea that a couple of other parties mentioned, which is the link between drought and LDN, talking about within the working group. I think one of the things that all of you should keep in mind if we move forward with this approach is that we would be in a position to have land degradation indicators, a biodiversity indicator, and these drought indicators where we can look at the relationship between these together. And I also point out to you that in this convention, when the framework for indicators was put together for the land degradation side, one of the innovations was to turn them into trends indicators, which we modeled here. You'll notice that, which each of the 3 levels. That puts us in the position to look at this relative to those things that influence trends. And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is going to be climate change. So my point here is that it's not in isolation. And I think that the point made by Dominican Republic about the relationship to LDN helps us take what we learn about the patterns related to drought towards how we manage land, which is key for our conferring resilience to drought. The comment made by the honorable delegate from India about the links to the Sendai framework, you may have noticed in the document that we actually made the same link in that early text that I was talking about before, and that is something that's in consideration because we don't want to do something that's outside of that process. As I mentioned before, anything that's related to disaster alerts, etc., receives a lot of attention and therefore has momentum. And I believe that WMO has been highly innovative in using the alert systems of all countries, the early warning systems, etc., the work on those as the mechanism to move towards these kinds of indicators, because within that process, there's going to be some sustainability. The honorable delegate from Argentina raised something that's extremely important about the indicators. It's not only about the underlying methodologies, it's also about the maps. And actually, one of the breakthroughs which WMO has had in getting these national meteorological authorities to work in a collaborative way, because of course in the beginning it's very challenging. We know this in this convention. How do you come up with something that's in common when we're using so many different methods in different countries? And what we proposed back to WMO was, well, why don't you start with the map? And of course they were also thinking about this in the working group. If we can make it where the maps have common characteristics, common legends, common statistical bins, if you will, for those legends, then the underlying methods could be different in the beginning, but you would still be moving on this harmonization path, and that gets you momentum. If you try to force standardization, it's not going to be there because you're going to lose country ownership. So that was a very good point raised by Argentina. Indonesia put forward a concept, and I think another country as well, about ecosystem variation. And I will mention to you that that's a fundamental component of land degradation neutrality within the scientific conceptual framework. In other words, we don't achieve LDN for all land without considering each land type, right? Otherwise, we would potentially sacrifice an ecosystem type for another. So modeling that approach, it could also be done in the drought context. I think that's a very important point that was raised. Saudi Arabia and then a number of countries, Iraq, Egypt, Syria, Palestine, mentioned quite rightly the very serious conditions in that region, in arid regions in particular, where it comes to drought. And in their analysis of this, they also talked about that also means that the capacities to address drought and monitor drought are developed. Several countries mentioned this. And I want to emphasize again that that's an asset here, right? It's not an issue of will this framework pull us away from what we're doing now. It should be viewed the other way, that what we're doing now can fit this framework, and that way everybody gains, and that the successes that Saudi Arabia may have had in setting up such systems can be shared with other countries. But Saudi Arabia also mentioned the importance of leveraging organizations, which of course is strongly built into this set of recommendations. Iraq mentioned this issue of specificity again, and I would like to draw your attention to the fact that WMO has informed me that there is a website which you can go to find who is responsible within this national effort that is already collaborating globally under this GMAS framework, so that you could learn more about it if you're not directly familiar with it. Iraq also mentioned regional drought issues, as did Palestine, and maybe was implied by several countries. And it's something that you could consider when looking at this decision, that maybe, I mean, in the reporting on LDN, there was some level of sub-regional analysis that was done, but it might be something that's encouraged. I mean, that's something for you to consider. It's not currently in the text, but it sounds like a very reasonable idea. Egypt was one of those countries that looked at the relationship between these different variables, specifically mentioning biodiversity, and I think that's powerful in this approach. And I think with that, I have covered all the comments. Syria also, like the Dominican Republic, talked about how, in fact, they're even further along. The drought indicator is already part of their LDN approach. And I think that's key, that we think about it that way, that drought is not in isolation of land, that we're trying to look at these in a synergistic way. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Orr for his response. We have just heard the response of Mr. Orr on the statement made by our distinguished representatives. Thus, have concluded the general discussion of Agenda Item 3. Distinguished delegates, I now invite the committee to begin its consideration of Agenda Item 5, entitled Development and Promotion of Activities for Targeted Capacity Building to Further the Implementation of the Convention. I now give the floor to the representative of the UNCCD Secretariat, Mr. Richard Byron Cox, to introduce the report on the development and promotion of activities for targeted capacity building to further the implementation of the Convention, as contained in document ICCD/CRIC 18/8. Mr. Cox, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, good afternoon. The Conference of the Parties, in its Decision 8 COP13, mandates the Secretariat to implement concrete actions to facilitate capacity building so as to enhance the implementation of the UNCCD in general, and specifically its 2018 to 2030 strategic framework, as well as to facilitate the role the UNCCD must play for efficacious implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. More specifically, this decision calls on the Secretariat to facilitate inter alia A, targeted capacity building to support implementation; B, provision of capacity building support to parties to help them achieve land degradation neutrality; C, the further development of partnerships to facilitate capacity building; D, the further development and promotion of tools for cost-effective capacity building; and E, in cooperation with partners, make scientific knowledge and best practices available for stakeholders in the Convention through the UNCCD Knowledge Hub, with the aim inter alia of scaling up sustainable land management practices and increasing the knowledge and scientific and technical skills of stakeholders. In the said decision, the COP stipulated that the Executive Secretary is to report to this 14th session of the COP on the implementation of this decision, hence the present report. Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, As regards targeted capacity building to support implementation, this report covers two areas, namely general support to targeted capacity building and supporting parties to achieve land degradation neutrality. Each of these subsections detail in precise terms what actions have been taken and the results of the same. Section 3 of this report addresses partnerships to facilitate capacity development and includes subsections covering partnerships to facilitate capacity building in the areas of drought preparedness, partnership for mitigation of the impacts of sand and dust storms, and partnerships to build capacity to support the mainstreaming of gender issues. In Section 4, the report informs of the further development and promotion of tools for cost-effective capacity building. Firstly, a general description is presented regarding the work done on enhancing all tools used to facilitate the furtherance of cost-effective capacity building. This is followed by two other subsections addressing the further development and improvement to the UNCCD capacity building marketplace and its knowledge hub. Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, the report's fifth and final section presents conclusions and recommendations for the consideration of this 14th session of the COP. Thank you very much indeed for your kind attention.
I thank Mr. Cox for his statement. Are there any delegations wishing to make a statement in connection with the report that was just introduced? Anybody, for those who wish to speak, please press the button speaker. Yeah. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of India. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the decision 8 of COP13 requested the Secretary to facilitate with available resources the implementation of Convention in support of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development through the enhancement, strengthening and promotion of capacity building. Mr. Chairman, India may agree to facilitate within available resources the implementation of the Convention in support of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development through the enhancement, strengthening and promotion of capacity building programs. For helping the affected country parties, we may say that it is to increase the LDN fund so as to attain the LDN target by 2030, and the need of hour is to the mainstream the LDN concept in the existing program and policies of the country party. Mr. Chairman, because a lot of schemes are there for this land degradation subject, so we have to do the mainstreaming so that we can achieve the target on time. If we say many times, there are many programs related to land which are not being implemented at place where degradation is happening. Therefore, the inclusion of LDN priorities should be included in the various organizations within the country so that targeting of the interventions, this would require sustainable capacity building of various departments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the representative of India for his statement. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cambodia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. We have heard and talked a lot on the importance of our conventions, especially SLM, LDN, restorations, etc. Land-based approaches can surely help solve many of the environmental challenges. We understand this very well. My point for now is how about our ordinary people and communities? They are also important players for the game. They need to understand, to know the causes for the damages and practices or technologies that could be practical and applicable for their levels. Before that, they also need to be aware, and we are the one who are in the position to help or to do this kind of jobs. The introduction of the idea and knowledge has to be simple enough. In this regard, I would like to request the Secretariat to help develop simple but attractive materials by focusing new learners. At the same time, videos can be very powerful means, but to ease our work at the country level, I mean for us to translate them with no mistake, I suggest to include English subtitle with that. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the representative of Cambodia for his statement. Now, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Grenada. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to distinguished delegates. Grenada welcomes this statement by the Secretariat on the work that has already been done. Grenada is thankful to the Secretariat for the assistance provided in assisting with the development of its National Development Plan. This plan was welcomed by the government because it lays the groundwork for a lot of the work we see that needs to be done in the area of capacity building, so that all the other institutions that are associated with the response to drought and also dealing with the issue of land degradation could be better able to make use of the information that is being produced. Now, the challenge for many SIDS is moving from theory into practice, and that is where we need the most assistance with regards to capacity building. So the institutionalization of capacity building is most urgently needed in the SIDS island, and we welcome all of the efforts that are being done. We welcome the resources that are being put into that area, and we encourage that those resources become more strategic and focused in providing needed assistance for the small island developing states. The islands are small, we don't have excess lands, we do not have any place we can relocate people. So when we face those challenges, we have to respond. So we look forward to a greater assistance coming forward in the near future. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Grenada for his statement. Now, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Kenya welcomes the targeted capacity building for the implementation of the convention. Kenya specifically recommends for targeted capacity in the national reporting. Excuse me. I'll go again. So Kenya welcomes the targeted capacity building for the implementation of the convention, and specifically Kenya recommends for targeted capacity in the national reporting for capacity in the measurement of some indicators, and secondly Kenya welcomes targeted capacity building on technological approaches in LDN implementation. I thank you, sir.
I thank the representative of Kenya for her statement. Are there any other delegations wishing to make a statement? Okay. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guyana. You have the floor.
Chair, thank you for giving me the floor. Guyana wishes to commend the Secretariat on the presentation of this report in response to the mandate given at COP13. Mr. Chairman, reviewing the report, there is much really to appreciate in what has been reported to the CREC. In fact, we see that capacity building is emerging as an increasingly critical dimension and mechanism in assuring the effectiveness of the convention in achieving its core objectives. So we find that this report makes a very important contribution in that regard. We believe that it is critical to ensure enhanced capacity of stakeholders really as a safeguard to the effectiveness of the convention and the various goals that we seek, objectives that we seek to achieve. In this regard, it is particularly important, we believe, to focus while all stakeholders, particularly women, youth, and the one that I don't see mentioned as much, local authorities, because we believe a lot of the critical decisions that are made with respect to the objectives of our convention are in fact taken at national level, but also at subsidiary levels, and the building of capacity really places those authorities in a position to make decisions that would redound to the benefit of the achieving objectives of the convention. We were particularly impressed by the work undertaken in different aspects. In this regard, we looked at the internship program, and we're very keen that that work should be continued and expanded. In this regard, our comment there would be that we see the need to ensure that there is equity in terms of participation in the internship program, and particularly for, and I think we're well aware for annexes, regions, countries that have acute challenges in terms of capacity. And I'll be a little immodest in saying, in particular for small island developing states, the countries of the Caribbean, and last but not least, my own country, Guyana. We were also struck by the effectiveness of the e-learning tools that are being developed. We noticed that quite a number of courses have already been rolled out, and you have a plan to roll out a number of other courses later in this year. We commend that undertaking, and again, there we'd want to ensure that they can be equally accessed by all stakeholders, all member states. So really, we commend the ambitious undertakings. We believe that it has been a robust response to the mandate that has been given. But like in other areas, the question comes back to the adequacy of resources. And there we believe, we agree with the report that there should continue to be emphasis, in addition to the resources devoted by the Secretariat itself, to enhancing partnerships, because I think it calls for the embrace of, even in some respects, innovative approaches that would allow us to continue this fantastic work. In that respect, I want to really say that where it is necessary, we should commend excellent performance. And I have, and I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I have oversight of all the multilateral bodies. And what I see here really compares with any other system under the other conventions and under other bodies. So we really want to commend a lot of what is being done, the presence at quite a number of undertakings. I think that is also effective, but really to see if we can harness some of the best practices that have been developed and really share with others, including with countries themselves. We want to say that while we commend the work of the Secretariat, we have also ourselves as Guyana striven to ensure that we mainstream capacity building. And in this regard, of course, the hosting of Quick 17 presented us with an excellent opportunity to advance that process. In fact, for us, it is a legacy of our hosting of Quick 17 that we would continue to develop and build capacity. And while Quick 17 allowed that opportunity, we have, as a government, decided that we would make the investment in terms of capacity building. So even at this COP, we have brought a large delegation to ensure that the focus, the emphasis, the capacity in terms of UNCCD issues transcends merely the main decision makers at this time. I should say in this regard that we want to particularly commend the Secretariat for the training workshop that was done in the margins of Quick 17, and it is something that we would like to see continued and really become a feature of our meetings, both the Quick and the COP, in terms of presenting the capacity building opportunities for a range of stakeholders, including the media. We want to mention in particular the capacity building marketplace as one of the best practices that we have in mind. So on the whole, and Chair, I'm sorry for the long intervention, but I think this has been one of the primary aspects of really motivation for us in terms of the work, the utility of the work that is being done by the Secretariat. So we commend the report again, and we look forward to further discussion with colleagues in terms of taking forward the very balanced and meaningful recommendations that have been presented in the report. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the representative of Guyana for his statement. Now, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding capacity building and training and the development of skills, we have an experience that we would like to share with you. It happened in 1994, together with a project that was funded by the World Bank in Egypt between 1994, as I said, through 2002. This project took place in a very arid area that only depends on rain for irrigation. Thanks to the training and the capacity building and the development of skills, both for men and women, which has involved the community level in developing plans, setting priorities, allocating budgets, assessment, follow-up, and the evaluation of the results. All this has been done in full partnership with local communities. And recently, since 2014, there has been some marked progress in capacity building, especially in the field of supporting youth under the auspices of the state president and the Egyptian government. I am sure that you are aware of the huge youth conferences that are held regularly in Egypt for Arab youth, African youth, etc., as well as awareness-raising campaigns and some developments and improvements in the curricula of agricultural and industrial schools, and the holding of workshops and training courses on food production. All this is a fruitful, successful Egyptian experience. We also hold training courses in other brotherly Arab and African countries. And we hope that Egypt would continue providing such courses for other Arab and African countries. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Egypt for his statement. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Syrian Arab Republic. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with what has just said by my colleague, the representative of the Arab Republic of Egypt, regarding capacity building and training and benefiting from their experience in various fields, including drought and the neutralization of land degradation. This is all I had to say. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Syrian Arab Republic for her statement. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Venezuela. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I would like to take this opportunity to speak about capacity building, because I believe that this program has borne great fruit, particularly when strengthening the national report through the prize system 2018. Further, as we start to contemplate how to improve our tools for the 3 LDN indicators, I was thinking that using the experiences that we have had in this global methodology for the development of these 3 indicators, that we could develop practical tools that would assist us in producing further data, which have already been quite useful in working with Target 15.3. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Venezuela for her statement. I now invite Mr. Cox to respond to the statement made by our distinguished representatives. Mr. Cox, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, I wish to thank each and everyone who commented and all of you who are here to listen to this report. This is very essential if we are to make this better. It's always a work in progress. So my sincere thanks to you. I thank India for their comments, and the Secretariat notes them, and India's commitment to the process. As regards Cambodia, I couldn't agree more with you. It's about people and doing things for people. Capacity building is about people, people doing things for people. Now, you have said that it should be simple, and that is quite true. People need to understand what you're trying to share with them and to teach them. Now, what I want to say here is that, as you would have heard mentioned, we do have quite a lot of courses on the capacity building marketplace. But outside of that, the Secretariat over this period, as you would see in the report, has developed a special e-learning platform. And that e-learning platform, the courses, we try to make them as simple as possible. So this we will continue to do. But outside of what we offer, I mean, those developed by the Secretariat itself, we also offer all the other courses that we can possibly find which are useful to this. Now to Grenada, I want to thank you for your comments, and again, we couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right with this, and as you would know, when Grenada took part in the first project on land degradation neutrality, we realized some of the limitations of these small island states, and we had to do special things for Grenada in order for you to be able to participate. So we are fully aware of this, and we are trying to address this. I want to tell you that at present, one of the things that we are doing is thinking how best we might be able to do more to help the small island states, bearing in mind not just their limitations, but their vulnerability as well. So all of this is being looked at in a most serious manner, in a most profound manner. Now, Grenada also said one has got to be a lot more strategic in doing this. Now, what I want to say here is that this Friday, today, many of you would have gotten on your table an invitation to a special capacity building event, which will take place this Friday evening, beginning at 6 in room 6. And there, there's going to be a special presentation about the small island states and about the urgency for capacity building. The reason for this is that in order for us to be able to address these problems, we have to know what they are. And the best people to talk about them are you, who come from these small island states. So it is important that you participate in this exercise, because there we can go into what you really want to see and see what we are trying to do. Now, Kenya made some recommendations, and I accept fully all of those recommendations. As we know, capacity building is one field that the process from day one saw as important. If you look at Article 19 of the Convention, it's clear that capacity building is fundamental. However, much was not done over the years, or as much as is needed to be done was not done. So those recommendations are taken. Now I go to Guyana, and I want to especially thank the representative of Guyana for being detailed in raising all of these matters. The issue of women, which you raise, has always been important to us. And from the first day of the establishment of the capacity building marketplace, we have always tried to find the opportunities for women, and in particular women from Africa. So if you look at the history of the marketplace, you would have seen that we have done a lot there. But you're absolutely right that much more needs to be done. The capacity building marketplace is a young place more than anything else. It's young people who use it, you know, and a lot of what is there as well. And you would see on Friday when you come to the exercise that it offers opportunities from all sorts, from scholarships to fellowships and everything else. So again, the focus on youth is there. Now, interest in the local authority, and that is, I think, a very solid point. We have been working with the Soil Leadership Academy to deal with the question of policy, generally speaking, but focusing on local authority has not been an issue. And that's a fundamental point that I fully accept, that this needs to be looked at, and you are talking from experience, because Guyana is a huge country with different regions. I happen to know because I'm from the Caribbean myself, and so looking at that sort of local, the capacities of local authority in policy and science and so on, and addressing this is a fundamental thing. And I couldn't agree with you more about that. Now, you also mentioned our internship program, and I want to tell you that it, as you have seen, is an extremely successful program. We are presently reviewing the program to make it into a more full mentorship program. And we offer this to people from around the world, young people from around the world. But you're absolutely right that the SIDS and the least developed countries do not have the resources to send someone to Germany to spend 3 months, you know, to live there and so on and so forth. And this is something that creates an imbalance, and you're absolutely right about that, and that needs to be addressed. Presently, we're also looking into that. We have partners who have been trying to support in one way or the other. I would not mention specific names, but some of these partners are part of the exercise that we will have on Friday. But it's through partnerships that we can do this. Now, I want to state here that Quick 17 was a fantastic thing as regards capacity building. It was the first time that the Secretariat was able to put on what is called a capacity building fair, and more than 100 countries participated there, and it was a tremendous success. I want to put it on record here our thanks, the Secretariat thanks to Guyana for having facilitated that exercise. Now, Egypt is something important, very, very important. The reason I say this is because the capacity building marketplace offers you the opportunity to share your capacity building experiences and to share the courses that you want to offer to the world. This is something that we have been trying to push very, very hard, but countries like Kenya use it a lot. South Africa use it a lot. Sometimes you see some African countries using it, but others don't. They don't put up what they have to offer. And this is an interactive medium where once you have capacity building that you would like to offer to share with others, we do it for free. You don't have to pay anything. And we put it up. So Egypt's point is a solid one. What I want to say here is that I want to encourage you to sort of use that facility that we have, which offers you the chance to offer to the world what you want to offer as regards capacity building. As you know, capacity doesn't lie in one place. It's all over, right? And we have to use all the opportunities. Finally, Venezuela. Again, I fully agree that the more practical tools, and you used a very good example, which is the reporting process, and this has been a tremendous success, and thanks to the efforts made in capacity building. So you're absolutely right. Finally, Mr. Chair, I'd like to invite everybody to come on Friday afternoon at 6 o'clock, and please believe me, I have some drinks for you. Don't tell them I told you, right? I have some drinks for you. So you come, let us have a great exchange, and let us have a good time and push this capacity building process forward. I thank you all very much indeed.
I thank Mr. Cox for his response. We have just heard the response of Mr. Cox to the statement made by our distinguished representatives, and have thus concluded the generous discussion of Agenda Item 5. Distinguished delegates, we have thus concluded our program for this afternoon. I will consult with the members of the Bureau with regards to the timing of the next plenary meeting of the committee, which will be communicated to you in due course by the Secretariat. But before we adjourn, I would like to give first the floor to the Secretariat for some important announcement. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to inform the committee that the CRIC Contact Group will resume its work immediately following the adjournment of this meeting, and the contact group will meet in Met 21. Also, the Committee of the Whole will be holding its second plenary meeting tomorrow morning in this room at 10 a.m. sharp. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. After the announcement, we can now declare this meeting as adjourned.